Hello and welcome to episode 55 of our SAP on Azure Video Podcast. Today is August 19th, and together with Robert and Goran, we are here to talk about anything related to SAP and Microsoft. Hello, everyone. So, unfortunately, Goran and Robert are on vacation, but I'm actually happy to have another recurring guest. And Bartosz will talk about his blog post series, which we had mentioned in the previous episodes, obviously, as well, on how to work with Synapse and SAP OData services. So, as always, before we hand over to him, I will quickly go over some news of this week, and then we'll hand over to Bartosz. So, what I want to start with is Murali has published a really nice blog post about high availability setup using the SAP Business Technology Platform. So obviously, Business Technology Platform is cloud agnostic, so it runs on AWS, Azure, and GCP. And obviously, you can leverage that to set up certain high availability and failover scenarios. So for example, you could have BTP running on Azure in Europe and in US East, and using the cloud connector and all the connectivity, potentially obviously also the SAP private link service that we talked about in the past, you can then connect to your SAP system. And with this setup, you could actually really establish or come up with a high availability setup for your BTP. Another scenario is an in-country failover. So potentially, if you really need to run BTP on AWS, then, for example, what you could do is you could have, since we have now BTP also available in Australia on Azure, you could really have an in-country failover by running BTP services in AWS or on AWS and BTP services running on Azure, both in Australia. And again, obviously connecting to your SAP backend systems. So I think that's a really nice scenario, a really nice idea that Murali has highlighted here. So I think definitely worth to check this out. Another thing that we just announced is the resizing of Azure virtual networks that are peered. So obviously you can always or could always extend and resize your virtual networks, but if you had them already peered, so for example, if you had a hub and spoke concept already configured, you had maybe your networks already peered, then resizing these virtual networks was not possible. I mean, you needed to unpeer and stuff like that to make this happen. Now we have this functionality in preview, which obviously can be very helpful, because what we see with lots of customers, they have peered the networks, and then obviously it's growing and growing and growing, and all of a sudden you need to change the address space. And with this preview announcement now, what you can do is you can, without breaking the peering of your virtual networks, you can actually extend and resize your virtual networks. Another thing that was very interesting, and I think that was already early last week, was Codespaces, the announcements from GitHub Codespaces, and that it's now generally available. You can easily use this, and I think that's already great. But actually, what was also really fascinating is the GitHub team themselves. They released a blog post how they switched to Codespaces. So this is a really interesting read. So GitHub.com is available since 14 years, and obviously they grew over time. So when a new hire came into the company, then they would set up all the environment for them, and that worked all fine. It was also, they really talk about this frictionless support to really make sure that new hires could quickly get started. And then, well, since the whole GitHub project grew and grew and grew, obviously the amount of services that needed to be replicated to each and every employee grew and grew. So what they did is they also switched to Codespaces. Now, since this is such a huge amount of data that they have, switching to Codespaces took a long time. So getting started was like 45 minutes. And now what they explain in this blog post is really nice. How they identified areas how they could trim this down, things where they could optimize, and the goal then was really to end up with 10 seconds deployment time. And what they also share then here at the end is really nice, really from some of the employees from GitHub that were saying here, that it's really working extremely well, and they're super happy that they can now use Codespaces for the environment. And I think it's really, again, in the spirit of lessons learned and eat your own dog food. This blog post really describes in a nice way how the GitHub engineers have switched to Codespaces for their daily development. So just take a look at that, read through this. I think this is a really nice insights into how GitHub is working. Then another thing that was just updated is the docs article about logic apps and the connectivity to SAP. So the team around logic apps and the SAP connector. So we had David Berg some time in one of our previous shows, and they're constantly updating this information. And one of the last things that they did is to really explain what are the requirements, what are the permissions on the SAP side, to make sure that the SAP connector for logic apps can actually call RFCs, BAPIs, IDOCs in your SAP system. So this is really a living document that is fed out of a lot of customer interactions, I would say. And actually, speaking of David, he is maintaining a GitHub repository with sample code. So if you want to get started with a BAPI or an IDOC, what he's doing here is he's providing samples on how this structure looks like. So if you're not sure how the structure looks like, then you can just take a look at these sample files that David has here, and these certainly help you get started. He also has some other information on how to use the SAP connector here with logic apps, but I think it's definitely really good. If you are working with logic apps and the SAP connector, then his repository here is extremely valuable. Bartosz?
Yeah, just wanted to say that I'm very happy that the amount of examples that we have for logic apps is growing. Because I think some people could be slightly intimidated by using logic apps for SAP connectivity, but in fact it's very easy. You just have to do it once, and really it's a great way of interacting with SAP system.
Yeah, and I think you also have quite a lot blog posts published on this, on how to use logic apps, how to use the SAP connector to connect to the SAP system. So I agree with you, and the amount of content that is available here now is really great. And again, what I really love is how David is really supporting this, how David is really helping the community to make sure that they can use the SAP connector with logic apps. So it's really nice to how much effort he's putting into all of this.
I agree.
So speaking of GitHub repositories, I also want to show one new thing that I found on my Twitter timeline when we had all these announcements about Codespaces and so on. So obviously, I hope you know our GitHub repository for the podcast. And now the beautiful thing is, if I press the period button on my keyboard, then nothing happens. Shoot, it was working before. I don't know why it's not working. Let me see. I think if this is not working, then if you go to, if you just enter def, shoot, because I'm not authenticated here. Sorry for this. So this is my mistake in a live demo. What should have happened if you click the period key on your keyboard, then Codespaces would actually open up, and you are able to edit your repositories directly in the browser. So you don't need to even replicate to Visual Studio Code or something like that. You can really edit in place your GitHub repository. So Again, I'm not logged in here, but if you are, just click the period button on your keyboard and then just watch how magically Codespaces is opening up and you can edit your repo directly in the browser. Good. One last thing that was also released last week. Our colleague Sachin talks about Azure NetApp Files and how you can actually use Azure NetApp Files for the global transport directory. Now, you could argue, why would I use Azure NetApp Files? We don't need the performance or the throughput parameters of Azure NetApp Files. But actually, Sachin explains in a nice way different scenarios, like all your S4 systems are in the same region, okay, in the same VNet. Then what happens if they are in different VNets? How does the scenario look like when I really access or need to access my my NFS file share from across the globe and stuff like that? So it's a nice article that really outlines different architecture settings of how you can use ANF with your global transport directory. So that's it for this week from my side. With this, maybe let's hand over to Bartosz. Maybe you can again quickly introduce yourself. I mean, I guess most of our listeners know you from your fantastic blog post series that you had in the past. You also were on the podcast before, and now for the last 4 weeks, I think, you have published a new blog post series that we talked about as well here. So Bartosz, over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bartosz Jarkowski. You probably know me, as Holger said, from the blog post that I'm spamming you with.
In a positive way.
In a positive way. I'm working as a cloud solution architect at Microsoft, and on a daily basis, I help customers with moving and innovating their SAP landscape with Azure services. One of the topics I really like, and I mentioned that already a couple of times before, is that I really like the surround services that are available in Azure. So, Holger, you mentioned Logic Apps, which I think is an excellent way on connecting your SAP system with the rest of the world. Because with this low-code approach, you can really build integration quickly. And while it is important for very large enterprises, I think especially small and medium companies can benefit from this, because they don't have to purchase a very expensive integration suite. They can just start using things. Yeah. So yeah, Logic Apps, I really enjoy my time that I spent with Logic Apps. And yeah, a couple weeks ago or months ago, I had the pleasure of presenting invoice processing scenario here in the podcast. But as much as I like integration, I like the data topics and how we can make the data free and maybe democratize this data, eliminate the data silos. And as SAP system lays in the heart of any organization, it contains one of the most valuable information a company can have. The challenge is that SAP, in the end, is a data silo. It's quite difficult to blend this data with data coming from other sources. I know we have solutions like Business Warehouse, but to be honest, I'm not really convinced that it makes things easier. I think it's really excellent piece of software if you need to report on the data that you have in your SAP system or the whole SAP landscape. But if you have to blend it with data coming from other sources, I think it's a smart idea to look for other solutions. Mm-hmm. And I presented already the Power BI dashboard that I've built. I won't do it again. So if you'd like to see what can you get with the data hosted in Azure, feel free to watch one of the previous episodes. Very often when I talk to customers, they agree with the idea of having the data available in Azure and blend data with data coming from other sources, they just have one blocker. How do we actually get the data out of SAP?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a big challenge, and I fully understand why, because where SAP uses their own protocols for communicating with external world. Even iDocs, which we use for integration, is something very specific for SAP system. Yep. If you say that you would like to receive an iDoc to any integration consultant that haven't had a pleasure working with SAP system, they won't know what are we talking about.
Yeah.
But fortunately, SAP a couple years ago decided to invest in OData services. And while I really see a huge benefit around the integration part, I think OData for data extraction is still slightly maybe not well discovered topic.
Mm-hmm.
We know it's possible, but even myself, I'm thinking that OData and data extraction, well, these two things don't really go well together, because OData service is in the end an HTTP call. Mm-hmm. So if we have to extract, I don't know, millions of records, then it can become challenging. So is there a way to progress? And yeah, I heard feedback from customers saying, oh, we had 1 million records in the OData service, and basically it fails every time we are getting short dump or there is a problem with ADF. And to be honest, I'm not surprised.
Mm-hmm.
But then I thought, is it really such a bad protocol? Maybe we can use some tweaks. Maybe we can learn how to use it to actually squeeze the most out of it. Mm-hmm. And yeah, this is what I decided to do. So as the summer was upcoming, I thought, I'm not so active in the community recently, so maybe that could be a good idea to write a blog series focusing on the OData extraction using Synapse pipelines.
And I think that's really great. And I'm really following your blog post here very actively, because I am a huge fan of OData, of the OData protocol. I think it's really beautiful how you can use it across different products and how it's really a standardized protocol. But I agree with you. I had a lot of concerns when it comes to huge data operations. So that's why I was super happy to see your blog post, and really interesting to follow each and every episode. So it's really, really a fascinating topic that you're covering there.
Yes, and initially I wanted to cover the most important aspect in a single blog post. But actually, I thought it's not a good idea, because this is such a wide topic that I wouldn't like limiting myself to just a single post. So this is why I thought creating a series is actually a better idea. And as always, you can find all the episodes available on SAP Community. So I prepared a special tag, Summer with OData extraction.
Oh, okay.
So now with a single link, you can filter and see all the episodes available. So in the first episode, we are building a very simple data extraction pipeline. So there is not really a lot of magic here. It's just to set the ground and show what's possible, how we can get the data from one place to another. But with each episode, the solution that we are building grows. So while the initial pipeline, there was a limitation that we had to manually enter the OData service that we want to process, and every extraction would require some modification to the pipeline. In the second episode, I described how to solve this issue using parameters. In the third episode, I'm describing the metadata store, how we can have a central repository of all the OData services that we want to process. And this way we can just schedule a job and everything is done without any requirements for our manual intervention. Then the fourth episode, this is something, one of the topics I really wanted to describe, is how to handle these large volumes of data. Because yeah, I know the feeling that you are trying to do something, trying to extract the data, and you are getting a short dump. Because the content of the OData response cannot is just too long. So there is a very simple solution to it, because we can implement client-side paging and just using two parameters, skip, which basically tells OData service how many records it should skip, and the top, which describes what I call a batch size. So how many records do we want to read at once? And yeah, that allows you to process any amounts of data. So for my testing, I ran this against over around 6 million of records. And the extraction took half an hour, 40 minutes. So I really think it's a good result. And I'm talking about full extraction. So extracting every single field that is available, because what we should always think whenever we work with the data extraction is to consider which data do we actually need, what do we require to fulfill our extraction, our use case. Because one of the common things I hear when talking to customers is they want to extract everything, and it causes a lot of challenges, not only around the extraction job, but also around security, how to correctly protect the data, how to ensure that everything is reliably extracted to data lake, and what to do with the data. Because I don't really see a sense of copying your SAP system to the data lake. No, yeah. I think we should always focus on the use case, identify the use case, identify which data do we need, and then process that data. Because if we limit, and actually the last episode that I published last week is focusing on filtering and selection. So how can we use OData query parameters to, for example, only get data for particular customer, or maybe where there is a certain sales order value, or maybe location of the business partner is in UK or Germany or France. Maybe instead of extracting millions of records, we can actually extract just 100 of them. And when we look at the statistics for the data extraction, again, it's included in the blog, there was a really big difference in how much time it took to extract the data. So I think that I can't really find it right now in the blog, but it was like 90% decrease in the duration and in the file size. So I think this is a great achievement just by selecting columns and rows that we need. And of course, I continue with this OData journey. So I'm actually very proud because I finished one of the latest episodes where I talk about not this one. Where I talk about delta extraction. So of course, filtering is important, but if we have, and this is not uncommon, a billion rows for a particular object, for example, a billion sales orders. I met customers who actually had so many records. Extracting everything every day is not really an option. Even if you have a very tight selection and filtering rules, we are still talking about millions of records that we have to process every day. That's really not an option for them. This is why I decided to also include the delta extraction topic. And I have to admit, OData services are very powerful here. before I deep dive into this, I would like to use this opportunity and really publish the blog right now live.
Live. Perfect.
So I'm clicking publish. This blog is now available for you. And in the latest episode that just released, I describe how to enable a very simple data extraction that uses timestamp information that's available in many OData services to extract only new and change information from our last extraction. And here is step by step, as always, process. I allowed myself to add a bit of introduction to data extraction because I think it's also important to explain different ways how you can do it, some workarounds that you can implement in your workflow to make the processing more robust. Couple of examples why some services have this last change date time information, like, oh, here, this is the sales order information, perfect OData service for this. But unfortunately, here I have the example of business partner OData service where it's still possible to enable data extraction, but it might be just a bit more difficult because we have to compare the creation time and last change date and time. So there is a lot of possibilities, and this episode really focuses on basics. We are actually creating this data processing on our own using Synapse, because next week, in the grand finale of the series.
Oh, the finale already. That's not good.
8 episodes, I think it's enough. But I want to describe how to force SAP to actually manage the data information for you. This way, you don't really have to keep an eye on the last change information, because SAP can do it for you. And when we think about this old RFC type communication, where we have to, how, for example, we connected BW system with ECC system, it would use SAP extractors. A great news is that actually SAP extractors can be exposed as OData service.
Okay.
There is even more, because some of the CDS views, they have analytical capabilities, and they are also prepared to work as data extractors. So even we can use them as well to extract data and ask SAP to manage the data for us. And what's quite interesting, and that's something new that's available in SAP system, because usually the data changes were also tracked based on last change timestamp in SAP system. But starting with S/4HANA release, I think it was starting with 1909, you can actually use SLT framework to do this trigger-based replication. So whenever you add or modify, for example, a sales order, instead of using the timestamp information, it will keep this record in the database and let you extract it without checking the timestamp. It's excellent way of extracting data where you don't have this timestamp information, because unfortunately it's not available everywhere. But yes, with this new possibilities, pretty much everything can be extracted. And yes, next week it will be available on SAP Community. I will write exactly step by step how you can approach that and use in your SAP landscape. Just to quickly deep dive into how it's working. So I'm using a very similar approach to what we described with Marius a couple of weeks ago. So together with Marius, we created an ADF accelerator that makes it easier to extract data using the SAP table connector available in ADF. And SAP table connector SAP table connector focuses on the NetWeaver tables. So you can actually connect to your system and extract information at the table level, which is a very nice feature. A lot of customers uses it. But with OData, I think you can make this processing even better, because firstly, instead of working at the table level, you work at the object level. Instead of crazy German acronyms, you actually you actually work with a meaningful names. You don't have to work with VBAP, VBAC tables, which no one knows what they mean. With OData, there is an API called sales order, which actually gives you a sales order with fields that I presented just a moment ago. Yeah, let's open it. Yeah. So this is for the business partner, but we have what is the business partner number, what's the customer, what's the full name.
Readable. Yep.
Yes, it's readable. So with this, you can actually release this data to your functional experts, data architects, and they can understand this. Of course, there is still, I still think this SAP knowledge is required to efficiently work with this, but it's not like data analysts would be blocked and cannot do anything. No, they can do quite a lot of work already. Yes, so I'm using a very similar concept to what we did for the table extraction. So I'm using the metadata store. I wanted to do it slightly different because in the ADF accelerator, we are using actually SQL database. And that's, I think, one of the best approaches we could take. But at the same time, SQL database requires some management. I know we run it in the cloud and Azure does it for us, but still we should think about some sort of a backup, manage what's the utilization. So there is still a bit of overhead. So this time I decided to use something simpler, Azure Table Storage, which is just available as part of the every storage account. And I'm using the same storage account for the data lake and also to keep this metadata store. So everything is kept in a single resource. It's also very easy to maintain the data. So we can just double click, we can just click add a record and we have all the parameters ready and we can just provide the details. It's also quite easy to of course, edit existing records from the Azure portal. So this covers the UI part. Of course, I highly recommend to create a small power up that can make it even easier, and maybe you could release this power up to your functional experts or data architects, and then they can maintain all the information. But I think just using the Azure table storage is also quite good option. So the process works pretty much the same as previously. So we have the metadata pipeline that connects to the Azure table storage and reads information about every single OData source that we want to process. Then, depending if this OData source is Delta extraction enabled or not, it will trigger a respective pipeline. For standard extraction, we are checking how many records is available. And then there is a very smart expression that I use to calculate how many batches do we need to actually extract everything. So let's say we know that extracting sales order information, that the upper limit for us is, let's say, 1,000 records per request. But we have 12,000 of records in the database, which means that we have to run the copy data activity 12 times, each time extracting 1,000 records.
Yeah.
This way, not only we can parallelize the extraction and improve the
point,
and we can improve the extraction time, but we also eliminate all the issues in between, because extracting 1,000 records, the processing in ABAP is a couple of seconds, and transferring this is again a couple of seconds. Again, detailed statistics you can find in one of the blogs, but basically to extract around 1,000 records, you need like half a minute in total. If you'd like to extract 15,000 at once, you'd probably need a bit more. But yes, I think this parallelism of execution is quite important, because especially with many chunks of the data, because then yes, you can extract basically a couple millions of records at once, which would not be possible without that. So yes, in one of the child pipelines, we are checking the number of records to split the copy activity into many chunks. The pipeline that I'm describing in the latest episode is a bit more advanced, because here we have to think about the data extraction. So firstly, we are sending a request to the SAP system to tell us what's the latest record in the database.
Mm-hmm.
Then we are doing a lookup activity again to check the number of records, because despite that we are implementing data extraction, we still want to be. I still wanted to make it possible to chunk the request, because still the initial extraction can be quite big. And finally, we are using the for each activity to run the copy data. The difference is that in the copy data, we'll take the high watermark, which is the results of the first lookup. So we are checking what is the newest record already available in SAP database.
Mm-hmm.
And we are reading what was the previous extraction time, or what was the newest record in the in SAP database during the previous run. And we keep this information in the metadata store. There is a special field watermark. And we are only extracting data that are in between those two watermarks.
Mm-hmm.
And that provides quite reliable processing, where we can actually limit the amount of data and every time focus only on new data. Yes, and maybe there is one more thing that I would like to tell, because very often I get questioned how I come up with these ideas for the blog. How much time do I spend on writing this? So I spend quite a lot of time. I like it. I truly enjoy that. But to be honest, learning new things is all about failure. And look how many failures did I have just to try and come up with the correct formula with the correct settings. I think because I'm saving everything to GitHub here, and I'm publishing changes so often that I run over the API rate limit for GitHub. Yeah, so it's really a great journey. It's fun doing this. It's fun discovering new things, learning new things, and then passing this knowledge to others. I really enjoy that. Yeah, and thank you everyone for following me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on SAP Community. Thank you for your feedback, because that's always great to hear that you are using the blogs, that you are using this knowledge, and that it's useful. For me, this is important, because it doesn't make sense to write blogs just because of writing. I really want that it brings a value to you.
So Bartosz, it definitely brings also a huge value to me, and I think, I mean, it's really fantastic the blog posts that you're writing and the amount of blog posts that you release, but also the quality. And I very much like this last thing that you just showed, because obviously reading through your blog posts, it's always really fantastic. It's beautiful. You see the end results, and it looks all so easy when you do it. But you're right. I mean, there's so many failures. There's so many mistakes that you do to finally then come to this conclusion, to the working blog post that is then really finally working. So I think it's really great that you showed a behind the scene look, and really, it's not all that you just write it down and it's done in 5 minutes, but there's a lot of work behind this, and that makes actually your blog post even more valuable to me. So I'm also thank you from my side. Let's
thank you, Holger. Yeah, I think this is something that we have to get used to, that we have to experiment with things, because then we can actually bring a value to our organization, to the customers that we work on, to the companies we work with. Because every time we fail, we learn something new.
Yeah.
And of course, the pipeline might not bring all the results that we want on the first trial, but then we have a relaxing day and we come up with much better solution. And that's actually true. And that's actually true because on Tuesday evening, when I was writing the blog, I had a small challenge with how you can reference a field, because I didn't actually know the field name, and I had to include this in expression. And I found a perfect solution at that time. At 2 a.m., I had a JSON document that I converted to XML, and then I used XPath expression to actually get the value from this JSON document. That was a perfect solution at 2 a.m. The next morning, I came up that I can just reference the variable in a bracket, and it's sorted.
Oh, okay.
So yes, sometimes spending too much time. Sometimes it's also important to take a break.
Yeah. Cool. Well, you can clearly see, I mean, you had this a huge yours SAP on Azure blog series. Then you took a break, and now we're super happy to have your new series almost completed now.
Almost completed, yes. So next week I plan to finish. Well, I plan to finish the main series. So I wanted to show the whole story up to the data extraction, because I think this is the next episode is the most important episode from the whole series. And I currently don't plan, or I don't have any topic I would like to describe as part of this series, but I'm not saying I won't publish anything, because, there is a couple of interesting things that we could describe, like, for example, how to merge data in Synapse. So there is a couple interesting scenarios that we can still continue and write and develop. But I think the main part is over. But of course, I will still publish blogs of this old blog series, your SAP on Azure. So just need to come up with some interesting ideas, maybe something about common data model. I think that could be interesting.
Cool. I'm definitely looking forward to this. And once you have this, you're more than welcome to join again the podcast and talk about it. Bartosz, it was really great to have you. Thank you so much for your insights. I think that was extremely valuable. I'm really looking forward to the last episode of your blog post series. And yeah, thank you so much for coming to the show.
Thank you very much, Holger. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.